In the spring of 1976, 35-year-old Ernest Eugene Shepard's life was rapidly crumbling around him. He was on the verge of being divorced for a second time. He was behind on child support payments. He was in and out of court on petty charges of disorderly conduct and passing bad checks. And on top of it all, his 15-year-old girlfriend was pregnant, which meant more legal trouble and financial obligations. Shepard's problems and expenses were piling up quickly, and he needed a lot more cash than his job as a hotel janitor was paying him. Shepard thought long and hard, and he came up with a plan. All he needed to do was get word out on the street that he had a large inventory of Mary Jane and other illegal substances to sell to the right buyer. But Shepard's get-rich-quick scheme came with a little twist. In reality, Ernest Shepard had absolutely no inventory to sell at all. He had made the whole thing up, and the proverbial you-know-what was about to hit the fan. My name is Michael, and this case was dubbed the April Fool's Murders, partially for when they took place, which was on the night before April 1st, 1976. But there's another very unusual reason, which will be explained. The full newspaper article from my thumbnail is available at grimsilence.com, and if you're interested in true crime that tends to be older and more obscure, please be sure to like and subscribe. 1976 was the year that both Apple and Microsoft got off the ground, Paul McCartney's Silly Love Songs was the top song of the year, and the #1 selling doll in America wasn't Barbie, it was Cher. And in Urbana, Ohio, a town of roughly 11,000, located an hour west of Columbus, Ernest Shepard was seeking a buyer for his imaginary stash. Shepard decided that he was looking to move 16 pounds of Mary Jane, that's 7¼ kilograms to non-Americans, and Shepard would also claim to have 1,000 doses, or hits, of what we're going to refer to as Lakeshore Drive. At the time, the street value of the non-existent Mary Jane alone was about $2,300, and the fictitious Lakeshore Drive would bring another $2,500. Shepard's ingenious plan was to get a buyer to show up with cash to make the purchase, at which point the illicit deal would suddenly turn into a robbery. Ernest Shepard recruited an acquaintance to try and arrange a deal, and her name was Mary Ann Hughes. The 29-year-old Hughes was an Urbana native who had relocated to Riverside, California, but she was back in town on a visit, and she still had plenty of contacts in the area. Hughes, who herself had done some small-time dealing in the past, had no idea what Shepard was really up to, at least not at the beginning. She knew that Shepard peddled some Mary Jane here and there, so she took him at his word and made 2 phone calls. One call was to friends in Cincinnati, and the other was to a pair of gentlemen right there in Urbana. Being smart shoppers, all of the prospective clients wanted samples, but of course, Shepard had none to give. The Cincinnati contacts apparently smelled a rat and lost interest, but the potential buyers in Urbana seemed unfazed. 20-year-old James Lee Brake and 19-year-old Ricky Miller, both of whom were acquainted with Hughes, agreed to a meeting. And so, on March 30th, 1976, Ernest Shepard, Mary Ann Hughes, James Lee Brake, and Ricky Miller met up at a local tavern called the Miami Inn. It is unknown what was discussed, but the group was seemingly smart enough to not broker a deal in such a public place. This meeting was more of a meet and greet, a chance for the two parties to feel each other out and see if they wanted to do business. The very next day, on March 31st, James Brake went to visit a friend by the name of Kevin Hess. Brake needed to pick something up that he had left behind at this person's home. It was a knife. A switchblade, to be more exact. Hess, apparently sensing some urgency on Brake's part, asked what he needed the knife for. Brake replied with confidence, "You'll read about it in the paper." Later that evening, around 9 p.m., Brake went to see his girlfriend, Joyce Sells, at her place of work, telling her that he needed her car, and for some reason, he believed that he would soon be returning with $4,000. It is unclear how much Sells knew about what was supposed to be happening that night, but she and Brake went to her car, inside of which were people that witnesses could not identify, and then Sells and Brake, with the others in the car, drove off. An hour later, at about 10 p.m., Sells was reportedly seen driving her red Ford Pinto into a gas station with Ernest Shepard in the passenger seat. And that would be the last time Joyce Sells was seen alive. 2 days later, on April 2nd, 4 middle school girls were traipsing through some trees near a residential area when they discovered the young woman's body. Sells had been shot once in the head with a small caliber weapon. The 27-year-old woman from nearby Mechanicsburg, Ohio, was found about 20 feet from the roadside, fully clothed and still wearing rings on her fingers. The red Pinto that belonged to Sells was located just blocks away. Police ruled out robbery and the R word as motives, leaving them with little to go on. And so, they immediately began looking for James Brake and Ricky Miller. Brake was known to be dating Sells, and police didn't know who Miller was yet, but they knew that he had been seen with Brake and Sells just prior to her murder. On the same day that the Sells murder was uncovered, police received more alarming news. Marguerite Holycross, mother of 15-year-old Patricia Lynn Holycross, reported that her daughter had been forcibly taken from her home. It would later be revealed that, late at night on April 1st, Ernest Shepard had crawled into the teenager's bedroom through the window, demanding that she leave with him. 15-year-old Patricia Holycross told Shepard, her 35-year-old boyfriend, to get lost. It was a school night, and her mom was right there in the house. But Shepard was insistent that she go with him, and Holycross relented, but not before quickly scrawling a note for her mother. The note read, "Mom," was forced to leave. Holycross had willingly run off with Shepard before, but the girl still lived at home with her mother and her mother's boyfriend. And while the girl was unlikely to have been in any real danger, this was still a kidnapping, and Shepard now had a very serious charge added to his otherwise petty rap sheet. News of the Sells murder began to spread, and pretty soon, everyone in Urbana and the surrounding area knew that 3 men were wanted in connection with her murder. Police sketches of Brake and Miller were printed in the local Urbana newspaper and distributed to law enforcement agencies. However, newspapers did not publish any photos or sketches of Shepard during their search. Nearly 2 months passed, and there were no signs of Shepard, Brake, Miller, or Patricia Holycross. While the authorities continued their search, the 3 men were all charged with obstruction of justice, as police were certain that all of them had information on the murder of Joyce Sells. Holycross was not believed to be involved. And then, right around the 1st of June, 2 of the fugitives were apprehended in the town of Cullman, Alabama, a good 8-hour drive south of Urbana, Ohio. Because the disappearance of the 15-year-old Holycross had made this a kidnapping case, and also because Shepard was believed to have taken the girl across state lines, the FBI got involved. With the help of Ohio law enforcement, federal agents tracked Ernest Shepard to Cullman, a place known to Shepard as a result of one of his previous marriages. He and his 15-year-old girlfriend had occupied an apartment there under the assumed name of Clark. Shepard had found work in a chicken processing plant, and it seemed that the pair thought they were going to settle down in this obscure southern town and live happily ever after. Both were promptly yanked back to reality and taken back to Urbana, Ohio. In the weeks leading up to the discovery of Shepard and Holycross in Alabama, farmer Robert Bancroft smelled something foul on his land in Urbana. It was in the area where his livestock was grazing. He ignored it at first, but as the stench grew stronger, Bancroft figured there was a dead calf that he needed to dispose of. The farmer went about locating the source of the foul odor, and what he found was indeed dead. But it wasn't a calf. The lifeless body of James Brake was discovered on the Bancroft farm just 2 days after Ernest Shepard had been arrested in Alabama. The grass had grown tall enough to conceal the corpse from view. Police searched the area further and located the body of Ricky Miller about 100 yards away. Both men's wallets were found on the ground near their bodies. Near Brake's body was the switchblade knife that he had picked up from the home of Kevin Hess. Near Miller's body was a box cutter. And, like Joyce Sells, both men had been killed with a single gunshot to the head from a small caliber weapon. It was also determined that Brake and Miller had both been killed around the same time as Sells. The families of Joyce Sells and James Brake did not speak publicly about the murders, but Edgar Miller, the father of Ricky Miller, expressed shock and sadness at the news of his son's death. On March 31st, the younger Miller had borrowed $2 from his father, saying that he was going out to get a hamburger and that he would be right back. Edgar Miller never saw his son alive again. He told a reporter, "I don't think there was a better boy ever born. He never gave nobody no trouble, no static. He never gave us a minute's trouble." By all accounts, Ricky Miller was a good kid, a straight shooter. The young man had graduated from high school just a year earlier, and he went on to join the U.S. Army after graduation. Miller and Brake were high school buddies, and Edgar Miller described his son's generosity toward others, noting that Ricky worked while his friend James did not. But if James Brake needed something, Ricky Miller didn't mind picking up the tab. But at the same time, Edgar Miller described James Brake as a gentleman, whose reputation on the street was a bit less flattering. Of his son's murder, Edgar Miller said, "I wouldn't have any idea who killed my son." But the Urbana police did have an idea of who had killed Brake and Miller. They just didn't know why. Although police were unable to pin down a motive for why Ernest Shepard would have killed Sells, Brake, and Miller, they were able to identify another person of interest in the case. That person was Mary Ann Hughes. She was the intermediary who had connected Shepard with Brake and Miller to begin with. Hughes had also been seen at the Miami Inn with the three men before the murder of Joyce Sells. A few days after those four schoolgirls discovered the body of Sells, Hughes had left Urbana and returned to her home in California. Upon learning that she was connected to the murders, authorities charged her with obstruction of justice, flew out to Riverside, California, and hauled her back to Ohio for questioning. By mid-June, police had pieced together enough evidence that a grand jury indicted Shepard on 3 counts of aggravated murder while ignoring the kidnapping charge altogether. And a few weeks later, authorities struck a deal with Mary Ann Hughes, who, based on this photo, was apparently having a wonderful time being held in custody. Hughes agreed to cooperate with authorities in exchange for having the obstruction charge dropped. As the public spotlight shifted from the victims to their alleged killer, a few details about Ernest Shepard's past were made public. Despite the dumpster fire that Ernest Shepard's life had become by 1976, it turned out that the 35-year-old had once gone from being a high school dropout to building what could have been a promising career in the military. Shepard had enlisted with the U.S. Army and then re-enlisted twice more for a total of around 12 years of service, during which he earned the equivalent of a high school diploma, served for 6 months in Vietnam, earned the rank of sergeant, and was honorably discharged in 1973. Shepard's post-service history, however, is less clear. His connection to the teenager Patricia Holycross dated back to 1975, a year before the murders. The girl was just 14 years old, and she and Shepard had allegedly moved in together in Springfield, Ohio, a neighboring town. The pair moved back to Urbana in February or March of 1976, not long before Joyce Sells was found dead. And roughly 6 months later, Ernest Shepard would be on trial for his life as he faced possible death sentences for the murders of Sells, Brake, and Miller. Shepard denied that he had ever met James Brake or Ricky Miller before, and that claim was quickly proven false when Mary Ann Hughes started talking. In a deposition, Hughes described how Shepard had asked her to find buyers for 16 pounds of Mary Jane and 1,000 hits of Lakeshore Drive. She talked of how she and Shepard had met with Brake and Miller at the Miami Inn, and how Shepard had called her parents' house asking where he could reach James Brake. Shepard had apparently also claimed that he could help Brake find a buyer after the deal was done. Mary Ann Hughes also said that Shepard had shown her a gun while they were in his car. Shepard did admit to authorities that he had once owned a gun. When authorities captured him in Alabama, he had told police that he had pawned the gun, went and got it back, and then sold it to a woman at a bar. And after being transported from Alabama to Ohio, Shepard changed his story and said the gun had been stolen. The gun in question was a .22 caliber Astra Cub, a tiny, easily concealed weapon that was manufactured in Spain. This particular model, however, didn't meet the requirements of the Federal Gun Control Act of 1968, and it was no longer being imported into the U.S., making the Astra Cub something of a rarity. And it was this exact model of gun that police had identified as the weapon used in the murders of Joyce Sells, James Brake, and Ricky Miller. Ernest Shepard had pawned a .22 caliber Astra Cub on January 31, 1976, at Max's Swap Shop in Springfield, Ohio, where Shepard had lived for a short time with Holy Cross. Shepard went back to that pawn shop to retrieve the gun before the killings. It is unknown what Shepard actually did with the gun, but police were unable to locate it. The lack of a murder weapon was a major point of contention in the murder trial of Ernest Shepard. Prosecutor William C. Tompkins dubbed the murders the April Fool's murders because, quote, all the parties involved were fools. Ernest Shepard was a fool for trying to solve his financial woes by setting up a deal for illegal substances that he didn't have. And James Brake and Ricky Miller were fools for a very similar reason. At some point, probably after meeting Shepard and Hughes at the Miami Inn, Brake and Miller had decided that Ernest Shepard was an idiot. According to Tompkins, the county prosecutor, Brake and Miller thought Shepard was too stupid to realize the street value of what he was selling. On March 31st, after Brake had gone and gotten his switchblade from Kevin Hess, after he told Hess that he would be reading about something in the paper, Brake and Miller later showed up at the home of Chris Perks, a mutual friend, and Kevin Hess was there. According to court testimony, Brake told Hess and Perks that he was about to rip off a bunch of substances, 16 pounds of Mary Jane and 1,000 hits of Lakeshore Drive. And of course, police would later find that switchblade near Brake's dead body, with the blade open, and there was that box cutter near the body of Ricky Miller. Brake and Miller, believing that Shepard really did have inventory to sell, were planning to stage a robbery of their own. Instead of bringing cash to the transaction, they brought weapons. They had, in effect, brought knives to a gunfight. And based on how the murders were carried out, it doesn't appear that much of a fight had taken place. All three victims had been executed with a single gunshot to the head. Brake and Miller were the first to die. Shepard then had to silence Joyce Sells, who had driven the three men to the Bancroft farm where Brake and Miller were killed. The trial of Ernest Shepard lasted 8 days. It was revealed that bloodstains were found in the car belonging to Sells, but it was 1976 and the DNA technology that we rely on today was still years away from being developed. No fingerprints were found in the car, not even fingerprints belonging to Sells, its owner. Aside from the bloodstains that had been missed, the car had been wiped clean. The prosecution had not been able to produce the murder weapon, but there was proof that Shepard had retrieved his gun from the pawn shop on March 31st, the day that the murders are believed to have taken place. And that gun, the uncommon Spanish-made Astra Cub, was identified by the Ohio Bureau of Criminal Investigation as the make and model used in the murders. The jury deliberated for 12 hours before returning with their verdict. Guilty. Under the circumstances, the mandatory sentence for all three murders was death, unless there was some kind of mitigating evidence that would reduce the punishment to life in prison. And luckily for Shepard, the judge did find that Shepard was under duress when he murdered his three victims. He also noted that Brake and Miller had, quote, induced the circumstances that caused their deaths, essentially saying that the two men had brought their murders on themselves. Ernest Shepard was sentenced to 3 consecutive life terms and would be required to serve at least 45 years behind bars. Shepard's attorney attempted to appeal the verdict, and that appeal was denied in 1979. In 1983, Shepard attempted to secure a new trial based on a newspaper article that was printed during his original trial. In that article, it was stated that James Brake's parents apparently had information that might be relevant in Ernest Shepard's murder trial, but neither the prosecution nor the defense had questioned them. Brake's mother and his stepfather said that, in February of that year, Brake feared that someone wanted to hurt Joyce Sells, and if Brake returned to Urbana, he would be killed. While this is certainly interesting, it was not enough to overturn Shepard's guilty verdict. Ernest Shepard died in prison in 2016, 5 years before he would have first become eligible for parole. Condolences to the families of Joyce Sells, James Brake, and Ricky Miller. And personally, I think it seems a little unfair to call Joyce Sells a fool when we don't really know how much involvement she really had. Was she a fool? And also, what are the chances that someone else actually committed these murders? Please let me know your thoughts in the comments below, and thank you for watching.